Back in the 1950s, Mao Zedong ordered collective farmers in the Chinese countryside to meet certain food quotas. He made it clear that failing to meet those quotas would very likely result in failing to exist. He made the same thing clear to local representatives like mayors and regional officials all across China. He also made it clear that nobody was going to check whether or not the numbers that were going to be submitted were true. Now, I know this will surprise you, but everybody reportedly met their quotas. During this time of reported bounty, people in China began to starve by the millions. And this, in a nutshell, is why socialists always lie. And I'm not talking about the run-of-the-mill political lying that you see in relatively free economies. I'm talking about organized, systemic, consistent manipulation of not just things like campaign promises or social programs, but the blatant falsification of the economic statistics that what I would call civilized economies rely on in order to determine the success or failure of their policies. In socialist societies, it is critically important that it be impossible to determine whether your economic policies are failing, because they always are. It has long been recognized, even by mainstream economists, that, for example, China's economic growth numbers are fake. Economic growth, after all, is going to have an impact on whether or not the people in power in China stay in power. The organizations that calculate economic growth in China are under the complete control of the Chinese Communist Party. Media outlets that, under other circumstances, might do some investigation into these economic reports are under the complete control of the Chinese Communist Party. The internet, that could be another truth outlet, is, yes, you guessed it. Now, if our so-called leaders had the ability to fake the numbers the way they do in China, would they? Without a doubt. But this level of economic fraud simply is not possible in free societies because the avenues for information leakage are just too numerous, and the consequences of getting caught are just too great. China has the motive, the means, and the opportunity to fake their numbers, and as a result, it's very likely that the Chinese economy is actually about 60% smaller than is reported by the CCP. 60%. You can get more detail on why this is true from a peer-reviewed paper by a gentleman named Luis Martinez, who looked at things that can't be faked, like electrical utility use, in order to determine whether a country's reported economic numbers were likely to be faked. And like scientists used to do, Mr. Martinez's research corrected for factors that could skew the numbers, like the possibility that geographic location could affect how much electricity a country uses, whether certain countries or industries use electricity in different ways. Could electric use patterns vary based on a country's level of economic development? Even after taking all these factors into account, the results were definitive. China and other socialist countries have been lying about their economic growth for many years. And the implications of these lies are staggering. Just for starters, instead of supposedly vying for the United States for the title of the world's largest economy, it's now very clear that China's economy is actually nowhere near the size of America's, about 1/3 of its size, much, much smaller. This means, with declining economic growth in China, it's likely that China will never become the world's largest economy. And it's virtually certain that its GDP per capita numbers, which measure the relative wealth of individuals, will never equal that of the US. Never. This also means that China's debt load, which instead of the reported 70%, is actually north of 150%. This means that the economic crises China currently faces on many fronts are much more severe than commonly thought because there is less real money available to combat these real problems. Like their government, Chinese companies are very likely lying to their investors, resulting in a long overdue push to delist such companies from American stock exchanges. In other words, the financial world is finally catching on, and China's ability to trade on international markets is tightening. Now all this didn't just happen overnight. It's happened as a result of a series of smaller lies that snowballed over the years. Much like the alleged economic miracle of the former USSR, which after the Cold War was revealed to be a complete fabrication, Stalin actually did them one better, at least so far, by making up fake statistics to hide millions of deaths in the Ukraine and then executing the statisticians to cover his crime. He makes Putin look like Mother Teresa. Anyway, China today is living in an economic fantasy world of its own making. When the inevitable day comes that China is forced to live in the actual world, it will mean an economic and social reckoning of historic proportions. Why do socialist governments lie? Because they have to. The illusion of success and the evasion of truth is a carefully constructed part of the socialist playbook, because without them, even the most gullible adherents might have second thoughts.